Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Lori, I'm with DxO, and I have Dan Hughes with us today. He is going to be talking about fixing optical distortions with one click in Nik Perspective Efex. We're very happy to have you with us. Now Dan has been, he actually worked for Nik Software many years ago, and he does webinars with us all the time now. He is a real pro when it comes to Nik Software, so I know that you'll enjoy this presentation. He's also at RIT, which is the Rochester Institute of Technology in New York. He is the Chair of Photographic Sciences Undergraduate Program Director. He teaches. He is very immersed in photography, so I know that he loves to share and teach. And this is, Dan, I think this is one of your favorite things to do, is doing some webinars. So we're really happy to have Dan with us and with having you as well. So please sit back and enjoy. And Dan, I'll let you go ahead and start the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Laura. Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the webinar. We are talking about Nik Perspective Efex, one of the great tools within the Nik Collection 4 by DxO. I am on an Apple computer, and I'll be presenting primarily, well, I'll be presenting from Adobe Photoshop CC. I think it's 2022, if I remember correctly, right? I think it's the most recent version. And I just want to point that out. It's not really going to matter because we're going to spend most of our time inside of the Nik Perspective Efex interface. And that will work basically exactly the same way, whether we're launching from any other of the host pieces of software or even as an individual standalone. Anyways, if you don't have the software already, you can use this link. This is here on my screen. And you click the shop button, and you try out. If you don't have the software already, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, try out the free trial. It's a really great way to kind of immerse yourself into the tools. We've got a whole bunch of really great recorded content. I'm actually doing a webinar very soon in regards to Silver Efex as well, and I'll let you investigate that. But anyways, I'm going to close this link here, or this image. This is what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be fixing optical distortions, oftentimes with just a single click. I'm going to walk you through the interface and introduce you to some of the tools all of the tools that are built into the software, but some of the thought processes behind using the tools in Nik Perspective Efex as well. And one of the keys here, the major facet of Nik Perspective, and the reason why it's such a great and unique tool, is that it actually utilizes DxO's database of camera and lens profiles. And I'll show you what that means, but that's sort of the cornerstone of the software itself. And then there's some really cool corrective capabilities that are built into Perspective Efex, as well as some creative capabilities that you can use to sort of purposefully distort or correct, and or even play with some focus processes. I'll show you that. So let's see. The first image we're going to start with is actually this photograph. One of the keys, or one of the things that we're going to focus on, is the fact that when using wide-angle lenses, there will be distortion. In fact, basically any camera or an optical system combination, there will be some kind of distortion that occurs when you take pictures. When light is transmitted through these lens systems, the light bends a little bit depending upon the system, and this software, Perspective Efex, helps us to correct those things. Now, we are in Photoshop, so I'm going to go ahead and utilize the Nik Selective Tool here. This is the Nik Selective Tool. It's one of the great ways of accessing the Nik collection here within the Photoshop version of the software. If for some reason you launch your Photoshop or Elements and this Nik Selective Tool doesn't pop up, I'll show you how to get it. So I'm going to close it out for now. And then we're just going to jump right into the software. So if your Nik Selective Tool doesn't come up, you go up to the File drop-down menu. You go down to the Automate prompt, and then down into the Nik Selective Tool 2. So you literally just click on File, go to Automate, Nik Selective Tool. Your Nik Selective Tool will pop up. And then if you want to, you can move into the settings, which is in the lower left corner of that interface, and you can actually tell the settings, you can use a checkbox in the settings to have this Nik Selective Tool, this feature, open up anytime you launch into Photoshop. It's how I work because I'm using the Nik collection for basically almost every photo I use or open into Photoshop. I'm using one, if not several, of the Nik tools with the Nik Selective Tool. All right, long story short, before we jump into Perspective Efex, so that I can show you a before and after, I'm going to go ahead and just hit Command J. And what that does in Photoshop is it duplicates up our layer. In fact, actually, I'm going to delete this. I'm just going to get rid of a couple little things here that are occurring on the couch just to clean this up. So, this is a couch that a little kid basically lives on. And so we've got some nice little things to clean up on there. So I'm just going to hit Command J. We will have our separate layer. You can see that here in the upper right corner of the interface. And I'm doing that just so when we come back into Photoshop, I can show you before and after, basically. Now, moving into the Nik Selective Tool, we click on Perspective Efex Pro. And Perspective Efex is going to launch here. And nothing happens automatically here, at least to start out with. But what we do here is we move into the tool set on the right side. And by the way, I want to show you all of the different facets of the software here. Like if I hit this button in the upper right corner, it goes into a complete full screen mode. I believe if you just tap the F key on your keyboard, that'll do the same thing as well. Nope, my F key is not working. Anyways, I click on my full screen view, and that just gives us a little bit more real estate for our image. We'll talk about the tools that are, or the interface interaction tools that are in the upper left corner in a little bit. But for right now, we're not going to see much happening up there because we haven't made any adjustments to our image. So the first thing that we're going to do is move into the upper right corner of the interface. And we're going to talk about distortion. So the distortion feature here will automatically adjust our image and fix the distortion that's occurring because of the camera and lens combination. Now, this particular camera and lens module has not been downloaded yet. And that's why this says a DxO optical module must be downloaded for this image. So we're going to go ahead and just click this download module button. And what should pop up is it'll ask us a question. It'll say which of these modules corresponds with the image. And it should only give you two options here, none of the above. And then also Fujifilm X-T3. So this was shot with a Fujifilm, and I was using the 8 to 16 millimeter. And by keeping that clicked on and clicking the download button here, we'll get, it's a very small file. It's something like 100 kilobytes or so. And this is the profile that we just downloaded for our combination of our camera and our lens. And so now in the upper right corner, you can see the auto button has been highlighted, and then we have the camera and lens combination listed. Now, just as a quick before and after, if you follow my cursor into the upper left corner, there's a little before and after button. And if I press and hold that button, I can see the before. And when I let go of the button in the upper left corner, I can see the after. Now, there wasn't too awful much distortion to get rid of in this case. So the before and the after, but you can see it's fixing our image for us. Now, if for some reason your camera and lens combination doesn't exist, like let's say you are shooting with, fill-in camera, whatever camera you're using, let's say a Nikon Z6, right? But you have adapted a lens from the 1990s that DxO just has never created a combination for the, this contemporary camera and an old manual lens, let's say. If that happens, or if you're a photographer who does that, you can actually move into the upper right corner here, and you can adjust for the different kinds of distortion that might be occurring manually. Now, most of the time, and also if you're using contemporary camera systems, within the last, 7 years or so, probably even further back than that, given that DxO has been doing this stuff for a long, long time, the auto mode is going to be the way to go. But if for some reason you do want to or need to work manually, because you could work in a sort of creative fashion here, you can click on the manual button, and then you can correct for barrel distortion, pincushion distortion, fisheye distortion, and you can turn the intensity up and down, right? So in this case, if I wanted to, let's say I was photographing Ellie here for a Halloween purpose, right? And she's dressed up and she's, let's say, up some kind of monster or something like that. Maybe it would be a good idea, or it could make an interesting image, to actually add distortion in. So using the fisheye distortion and maybe increasing that, right? Now, she no longer looks human anymore, but that could be a creative way of approaching this sort of thing. For the most part, though, the idea here is to correct for these kinds of distortions. And so usually the auto mode, as long as there's a lens combination with your camera, it should work for you. And of course, you can adjust the intensity should you want to. The default is going to be at 100%, and that's just going to fix the distortion between the combination of the lens and the camera. Now, I'm going to go ahead and just close the distortion section here by clicking on the little triangle that's to the left of the distortion label. And we're going to move into the volume deformation area here. Now, this feature here we've got two options. So first of all, there's two buttons: horizontal, vertical, slash, or diagonal. You've got just two buttons. If I click on the little on switch that's to the left of our label, we actually don't have to do this. We can just click on one of these buttons. But if you ever want to turn on or off one of these features, you just click on that little on-off button to the left of the label of the area that you're looking at or adjusting. Now, if I click on this horizontal, vertical volume deformation, this tool is designed to help adjust for wide angle images, typically, where you've got distortion around the edges, or scaled distortion around the edges of something, right? And if I just toggle this on and off, so right now I've got the horizontal, vertical volume deformation option on. If I turn this off, you'll actually see the image sort of get unsqueezed, basically, right? So I'm going to turn it on. We're going to click on it again, watch the image, and what you'll notice is that around the edge, the scales of the image actually changes. So where this is really beneficial is if you're photographing a person, or you're photographing basically anything with a wide angle lens primarily, where the edges are being distorted in terms of scale. This feature is designed to sort of squeeze the image and fix it. Now, it will do two things. It will crop the image sometimes, and it will also potentially change the ratio of the image. So it's good to note that, because if I turn this off, you'll actually, let's see. Here, I'm just looking at the pixel count on the lower right corner here. You can see it's actually cropped in. The original image is 6,149 pixels by 4,099 pixels. And when I turn on the volume deformation, it's changing that. Not the biggest deal in the whole world. I just want to point that out so that you can recognize it. Now, the idea of this tool is to sort of fix the shape of the edge around the image. Now, in this case, the diagonal feature is not what we need, although I think maybe if I bring this down to 100, yeah, that actually is what we need, because that is the shape of her head, right? So this is not a typical portrait of a human, obviously. It's just this is an issue that occurs, the distortion that occurs with these wide angle lenses. This primarily is an 8 to 16 millimeter lens, very wide angle. And therefore, this is a situation where utilizing this tool is going to be helpful for correcting the shape of her head primarily, and then also the scale of her hand. So if we look at that before and after, we've used the distortion tool and we've used the volume deformation tool. This is the original image, and then here is our enhanced image. So that's actually much closer to the way she looks. I would say it's probably not entirely perfect. I'm going to bring this feature down. There we go. And I think that's about where we need to go. Now I'm basing this on memory, obviously, so it's kind of hard to do that. But that, and she's upside down, but that's closer to the shape of her head and much closer to the shape of her hand that was, very close to the corner up there. The original image was definitely distorted. So the before and the after. Now, there's a whole bunch of other tools on the right side of the interface here: perspective, horizon, crop, and miniature effect. Let's go ahead and click the save button on this image. I'll show you kind of one more before and after when we go back over into Photoshop, and we'll move into our next image. So I'm going to click the save button in the lower right corner of the interface. That's going to bring us back over into our host software. And in my mind, it's actually just a little bit easier to sort of see exactly what's happening with the before and after here on this photograph anyways, with the layers here in Photoshop. So here's the before, and you can kind of see the edges are not formed properly. You can see there's quite a lot of distortion in the corners, sort of displaying outward. And the distortion tool, as well as our volume deformation, has helped us to sort of fix those problems and straighten out some of those edges relatively easily with a checkbox, and then also a one slider as well. So let's go into our next series of images. And actually, the next series of photographs are very usual kinds of images to use this kind of tool on. Now, you can use Perspective Efex Pro on any photograph, and it works really well, when shooting with fisheye lenses to fix those major distortions, if that's the intention. Oftentimes, if you shoot with a fisheye lens, you are interested in that fisheye aesthetic, but sometimes you're not. Sometimes it looks better to sort of correct those things. In this case, I believe I shot this, it was with a 70 to 200 millimeter lens, and we're getting a different kind of distortion. So the last image we had barrel distortion. In this case, we're having a little bit of pincushion distortion, so we're going to fix that. Before I launch into Perspective Efex, though, I just want to show you we've got 3 images of the same structure shot with different lenses, and we're going to correct them all using this same tool, right? Now, they all suffer from slightly different distortion. In this case, this is I think it's the 14 to 24, if I remember correctly, for a Nikon. And, I'm pitching the camera upward, and so we're getting a keystone effect on our structure here. This is the state capitol building in Albany, New York. I was doing a scouting trip for a project that I was hoping to get off the ground around the year 2020, but we've had to push it back due to circumstances that everyone's aware of, actually. Now, anyways, this image was shot with the 24 to 70, and then this image was shot with the 70 to 200 at quite a distance. So they're very different photographs, but they're of the same structure. I also want to point out, and there's nothing I can do to fix this within Perspective Efex. I think I would probably fix this issue, well, by sending my lens into Nikon to have it recalibrated and fixed. But using PhotoLab, I can actually correct some of these problems. So this image or this corner of this lens is out of calibration, and you can see I'm zoomed into 100%, and it looks like there's a little wiggle. It's not sharp on the left side, whereas over on the right it's nice and tack sharp. So I've got a lens issue here. I just figured I'd point that out before we start fixing distortions and so on. Now, let's jump into Perspective Efex, and we'll fix this image. So with this photograph, I have not yet downloaded the optical module yet. So same with that last image, I hadn't downloaded it yet. Once you download the optical module for your camera and lens combination, you have it. You don't have to continue to do this. It's just in this case, I haven't done this yet because I wanted to do that live with you. So I'm going to click the download module button in the upper right corner. It's going to tell us what lens we're using and camera combination. So in this case, it was the Nikon D850 with the 70-200. I'm going to click the download button. That one was 3 megs. And voila, it fixed our issue. It fixed the distortion that was occurring there. So I'm just going to turn it off and on again. In fact, the last time we did this, I showed you the before and after button by pressing and holding the display button, the before and after button in the upper left corner, right? So you can see the before and the after. So it's fixing that distortion that was occurring. Another way to do that, to view, actually I'll show you a couple different ways to view it. If you move into the far upper left-hand corner, you can get a side-by-side preview. So in this case, there isn't a whole lot to see in a side-by-side preview, but this becomes useful when you start utilizing maybe the horizon tool or the perspective tool and so on. We'll use this one more time or a couple more times in the upper left corner. I just wanted to start showing you some of those interface options there. So the other way to turn on or off your feature that you're using is to use that little on-off switch that's to the left of the label of each tool. So you can see the before, and then I'll turn it back on and hit auto in the after. You can see the camera and lens combination. In this case, I don't think we need to use the volume deformation. And in this case, I'm not even sure if we need to use the perspective, but let's go ahead and just click auto and see what happens. Yeah, there's a little change there. If we turn that off, yeah, it's minor. In this case, I was standing at the New York Museum, which is across the way from the, I don't know, probably a quarter of a mile away from the New York State Capitol building, in which case I was up in the building taking a picture through a window. And so my perspective is sort of right on plane with the center of this structure. So I'm not looking up or looking down on the building, and therefore there isn't going to be a whole lot of perspective adjustments that need to be made. Whereas the other images that we're going to hit upon in a couple minutes, because I'm pitching the camera upward, there's quite a lot of perspective distortion that we need to correct for. So in this case, it's minimal. Let's go ahead and just minimize the perspective tool. Let's go into horizon. I'm going to click the auto button. I don't think there's any, there's no adjustment that needs to be made because I was shooting, at a level horizon there. If for some reason you click auto and it doesn't do exactly what you need it to, you can adjust the angle. So you can turn it, right? It's going to keep our edges for us. And then we can even angle it based upon a horizon line as well. So there's two different kinds of horizon. You can do a vertical horizon line and then a horizontal horizon line. And I'm going to show you, this is called an on-image control, by the way, this tool here. I'm going to show you how this works using perspective. In this case, if I go and start moving this around, it's going to start kind of messing with our image, and we don't really need to. So I'm going to go ahead and reset this. I'm going to turn off the horizon tool because we don't need it. We also don't need the crop tool, although it's really nice that cropping is built into the software. Actually, you know what? Let's crop. I'm realizing that at this point, with the distortion control that we've got, my image is no longer centered the way that I'd want it to be. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the crop tool, and then let's go ahead and just center this. So I'm going to click on my upper right corner prompt here. And then I'm just going to center this a little bit closer. And in this case, I'm using the edges of the structure, the building itself, in the upper right and upper left corner. The problem when I do that is now I'm missing the top part of our composition. So I'll go ahead and just sort of crop out the bottom of the image. Maybe set it right there. Click apply. There's more to the crop tool. It's really nice that it's in here. You can preserve your aspect ratio, or you can, create a custom aspect ratio or change your ratio if you want to. It right here inside of Perspective Efex. I would usually do that sort of thing right in my raw processor, whether that's Photolab or Adobe Photoshop or Elements or whichever raw processing tool that you choose. You can, of course, use this as a standalone, which is why having the crop tool in here is really quite handy. I just find myself not using the crop tool all that often here within Perspective Efex. And then you've got your miniature effect. And I'm going to show you this last tool in a couple minutes. So for now, let's click, well, actually, let's take a look at our before and after. So we fixed our distortion. This is the original image. And then here's our enhanced image. It's really a tight shot. I'm going to click the save button. And as I click the save button, it's going to correct our image for us. Now, this image, none of these images are necessarily supposed to be final images in this case. So, and I say that because I think if I were to use any of these images as sort of a final print or to present in some way, there'd be other work that we would be doing. So I would start within my raw processing software. I would move into my Nik collection here and likely utilize Perspective Efex Pro very early in my post-processing workflow. And that's because as we fix the distortion and as we adjust the image, we are adjusting the composition of the photograph. And therefore, I prefer to do that in the beginning of the process so that as I'm doing the sort of creative adjustments, let's say using Color Efex Pro, or if I wanted to convert the image to black and white with Silver Efex Pro, I have, basically my final composition all ready to go before I start doing those creative endeavors. So on our next image, this one was shot with that 24-70. Let's click on Perspective Efex Pro. Perspective is going to launch. We're just going to click the auto button in the upper right corner. This image, or this camera and lens combination, I've already downloaded the module for it because this is a common camera and lens combination that I use, but I'll click the auto button. It fixes our distortion for us with that lens and camera combination at that particular focal length. And once again, if we sort of click on the before and after, you can see the difference. So there's the original image, here's the enhanced image. It's as simple as that. Now, another tool that I want to show you in the upper left corner is called the grid overlay. With the grid overlay feature here, this is a great way to know and understand what's straight, what's not straight on, what's vertical and horizontal lines need maybe possible correction, or maybe what ones you're attempting to distort, for creative purposes. So in this case, we're starting to see some kind of keystone effect that's occurring because I'm shooting with, an optical system, a camera and lens, and I'm pointing the camera up. As soon as I start doing that, my vertical lines start to come together at the top, right? So you can see that these lines, it's an architectural structure. This building, is basically plumb from the bottom to the top. So that's, this image is not really representing the architecture all that well at this point. So the distortion feature here is going to fix the distortion that's occurring because of the lens and camera combination. But what we want to do is move into the perspective section here and correct our perspective. Now, just like all of the other tools here within Perspective Efex, there's an auto tool. And it does a great job most of the time. So let's click the auto button, see what happens. Boom. That's basically all we have to do. Now that's no fun in terms of a presentation. I want to show you what these other features can do for us, but most of the time, all you got to do is hit that auto button and it's going to fix your common problems like keystone effect that's happening like right now, or other sorts of camera pitch issues that might occur. Another way to do this is to show up with a camera that, with a tilt shift lens, a PCE lens, according to Nikon. Those perspective control lenses are just exceedingly expensive and they're fantastic. And photographers who have them and use them, that's great. But oftentimes we don't have those kinds of pieces of equipment in our repertoire. So it's really wonderful to be able to maybe shoot slightly wider than we really think we need to. As we're changing this perspective, we are going to be shifting and cropping the image a little bit because it's actually got to kind of lean the image forward. But long story short, we hit the auto button and it fixes it for us. Now I'm going to go ahead and reset this tool, which, by the way, this feature, there's a little reset button to the right of every one of our labels. So I'm going to click the reset button. It's going to turn off that option, and we're going to walk through. Let's just walk through the first and the third option here. And to do this, if I click force vertical parallels, basically what's going to happen is I can click on my button, and I have two on image controls, right? So I've got this line. Just for the sake of the presentation for right now, I'm going to turn my grid off just to kind of clean up the interface to make it easier to see in terms of what we're doing. But oftentimes when you're working, you want the grid on because it allows you to see, how far off the pitch is or how angled your image is at the time. Anyways, these on image controls, if you click on one of these little buttons here, you're able to drag the perspective control line to one of the verticals that you want to correct. And in this case, the easiest ones to find in my mind are these high contrast edges between the edge of the building and the skyline back behind the building itself. So what we're doing right now is I'm just clicking and dragging this button. Clicked on the button, dragging it over, and I can pretty well line up my edge. Sometimes, though, I can't line up my edge all that well, and I'm going to want to hold the Shift key on my keyboard. And what the Shift key does is it gives us this kind of little precision mode. So it moves a lot slower, and it allows us to kind of really dial in exactly where we're going to place our lines, right? So let's do the same thing over here with this left perspective line. So I'll just go and click on it and drag it over to our edge here. And I think my question, and I imagine other folks right now are probably thinking the same thing or wondering the same thing, is how long does this need to be? Like, should I put it up here and line it up, or should I put it down, very close to each other, or whatever? And what I found is it doesn't really seem to matter, how close these little dots are together. What really seems to matter is just making sure that I get as close to the edge of the object that I can. And I mean, in terms of the lining up this little line, I want to get it as close as I possibly can to, the edge, and then basically just take a gander and look, make sure you've got it. Now, if it's not totally perfect, it's probably going to be okay, unless you're doing very, very, very precise precision work where, maybe you're going to make a gigantic print, in which case you might zoom in. So in this case, what I just did, I just clicked the 1-to-1 button here, and I'm going to use my space bar to allow me to kind of move over to make sure my edges are where they need to be. Wow, I didn't get rid of my chromatic aberrations, did I? Got pretty major chromatic aberrations here. I should have checked that on within my raw processor. Anyways, here's the edge. I can kind of very much dial it in now that I'm zoomed in. I think I'm pretty darn close. Yep, pretty darn good. I'm gonna hit Command 0 on my keyboard. So that would be Control 0 if you're on a PC. And that zooms you back out to a kind of full screen mode. Now, I've set my lines, my perspective control lines. And the next step is to click the preview button in the lower right portion of our interface here, sort of middle lower right. When I click the preview button, software makes our correction for us. Now, if I go and make an adjustment to that, I can go and click this. Nothing happens until I click the preview button again. Now, I don't want to do that. So I'm going to click there or hit the Command Z button / shortcut. That would be Control Z on a PC. That's going to bring us back one step, right? So if you make a change like this by accident or whatever, you need to do an undo. Pretty common shortcut for you. Command Z is going to bring you back one step, and it's going to undo that. Most people are probably already comfortable with that tool. Okay, so we've fixed our perspective. I'm going to click the Apply button. Now that we've done that, We've now corrected our lines. If we turn our grid back on, you can see our verticals are now vertical, and it's looking pretty darn good. Of course, we are sort of losing some of the pixels around the edge because of this correction that we're making. So that's what's going to happen, because we're not making up new pixels. We're simply adjusting these pixels with a transform to fix our distortion that's occurring. Cool. Okay. So I think I'm going to click that save button in the lower right corner because I'm seeing that it's 4:37 right now. I've got a bunch more images to get to. One more of this New York State Capitol building, and then we've got some other kinds of images as well. I just want to, make sure we've got enough time to take a look at all of these different features, but I also don't want to bore you using the same picture. I just wanted to do this with the series of images so that you can kind of get a sense of, these are the same tools being utilized for different kinds of distortion that's occurring, / different amounts of distortion that's occurring because of the lens that's being used, and also the position I am when I'm taking these pictures. All right, so let's click on Perspective Efex Pro. Now, what you'll notice, I'm much closer to the I Love New York sign. The building actually looks a little bit diminished behind the I Love New York sign as well. We're going to go ahead and just click the auto button for distortion. That should clean up our distortion that's occurring because of the lens camera combination. Again, most of the time you'd probably just click the auto button to just automatically fix your perspective issue that's occurring here. You can see, if we turn our grid back on, you can see that we're getting that same kind of tombstone effect that's sort of, leaning back away from the lens, or leaning back away from our perspective. So let's take a look at how to fix that. And in fact, in the perspective tool, we just use the force vertical parallels. There is a force horizontal option as well. I don't find myself using this all that often. If I tend to use the force vertical, or if I need to do more extensive work, I will click into the third or the fourth option. So the fourth option here basically gives you 4 linked lines, right? So you can go back in and find your edge. And this can be a really nice way of working. I'm just going to do this really quickly, and it's not going to be exact, but just to show you, I want to find the similar lines here. So I basically want, in this case, using the 4, sorry, I'm trying to speak and make adjustments to the image. Using the rectangle option here, what I found works best is to try to make sure that your horizontals are horizontal and the verticals are vertical from each other, / according to how you want to adjust it. So when using the rectangle option on the right side, this is going to fix the perspective of the horizontals and the verticals. And these are linked together, right? Meaning the vertical are linked and the horizontals are linked. And so when you make the adjustment, it's going to link them. If you click on this button, the far left, the 8-point option, now what we've got is a force vertical and a horizontal, and they are separate from each other, which means if for some weird reason your horizon is off and you have distortion occurring because of the pitch of the camera, like you're shooting with like a Dutch tilt and you want to correct that, if you purposefully angle the camera, I imagine you're probably purposefully angling the camera, but maybe in some situations you didn't do that on purpose. In which case, if you're trying to correct those things, this is a great way of doing that, because I can keep all of these things separate from each other. In fact, watch as I will make some corrections based upon the I Love New York sign in the foreground, as well as the structure of the building in the background as well. So let's click the preview button, corrects all of that for us. Click the apply button. And as I've said before, I don't think most folks are not going to need to use the 8-point option all that often, unless maybe you're doing sort of a really interesting corrective or creative choice. Most of the time, the auto option works just fine. Now, when it doesn't, you can of course go into these other features. You can adjust your intensity, which is a way to kind of dial back the corrective adjustment. We've got an auto correction. We're not using the auto correction, but it's currently set to vertical and horizontals. And now once you've got your perspective adjustment, you can also kind of manually go in and make adjustments too, right? So there are these kinds of tiers of automation built into the software. The auto button just does it all for you. The force buttons, so your force parallel, force horizontal, rectangle, or 8-point option will allow you to do complex distortion changes and fixes for perspective purposes. And it's relatively automated once you set those points. But then you can also adjust with these sliders, up and down, left and right, and then your horizontal and vertical ratio. So as I said, with a lot of these features, I don't find myself using them very often. I don't know if I've ever used this horizontal vertical ratio. What this does is it stretches or compresses the image, right? So as you slide it, it's actually stretching in this case, it's stretching the image vertically. Whereas if I slide it into the negative, it's going to start sliding or stretching it horizontally, right? I don't find myself using them. I hope to make some images where I need to utilize that, but personally, usually if I've got something like that going on, I purposely shot that. What I find to be the most useful are the automatic features that kind of just fix these problems for us. And I don't think, maybe this image is a little bit off in terms of horizon. Let's see. Yeah, a little bit. So that changed our horizon. If the auto feature is not what it's not doing what you want, you can of course shift your angle, right? So you can manually do this. And that's the beauty of this tool. It will automatically fix the stuff that you might need automatically fixed, or you can go in and manually adjust them. All right, so let's take one more look at our before and after. In this case, let's look at the side-by-side preview. I'm actually going to hide the tools palette on the right side, and you can see what's happening here. And this is a more obvious set of adjustments that are going on here, and you can get a sense of the pixels that are getting cropped out so that we can create this correction, right? So you can see the pixel count in the lower right corner of each image, and then you can see, the corrected image on the right and the uncorrected, the original image on the left here. So it's kind of a good thing to A, know where these interface options are, but B, this might shift the way that you make the picture before you come back to your computer and start working on it, knowing that that's going to have to crop the image a little bit here or there. Okay, let's click the save button. It's 4:45. I definitely want to get at least to the next image because I've got a miniature option that I want to show you. And also, this is a photo that I actually shot this just this morning in my garden because I realized that most of the images that I was going to present with are sort of architectural situations. And that's a very common purpose to use perspective effects. But in this case, I've rented a camera from RIT. It's a Micro Four Thirds camera. It's an Olympus OMD EM1 Mark II, I think. And I've got this ultra wide angle lens with it. It's like an 8:16, very wide angle. And it creates some interesting, perspectives because of that. This little flower here is probably only about 8 inches tall. And then we're surrounded by some cool ferns. Let me show you the original image. So there's the original photograph. You can actually see the edges of the distortion that's occurring here. I'm fixing this with Perspective Efex, which I'm going to show you, and then I'm finishing my image off using Color Efex Pro. And I like to kind of present this as well because this is much more commonly what my file ends up looking like, right? I'm adjusting my stuff with perspective, and then I'm going into Color Efex Pro or using Viveza or utilizing Silver Effects to convert the image from color to black and white, and combining these different tools together. All right, so let's get rid of those layers. Let's go in. I'm going to hit Command J. That's going to give us that secondary layer as well. Most of the Nik plugins, when you launch most of the Nik plugins in Photoshop, you get, by default anyways, a merge stamp visible, which basically means you get an extra layer of pixels that you're adjusting with. Perspective Efex Pro and then HDR Efex Pro don't do that automatically. So if you want to work with layers like this, you have to duplicate your layer up first. Hopefully that doesn't create any confusion, but so I'm just going to rename this Perspective so I know what it is. We're going to click on Perspective Efex, launch into the software. In this case too, I'm launching a PSD file, right? Usually I was launching a RAW file, and it automatically recognizes what lens we've got and what we're using. I'm going to click this auto button, and it's going to yell at me, right? And it's yelling at me because I've launched a PSD file, and the original raw file metadata isn't attached to this PSD. So what ends up happening is that I need to find the original file, right? Now, if I just launched, as we have done before in this webinar, I launched a Nikon RAW file into Adobe Camera Raw, and then from Adobe Camera Raw into Photoshop. Perspective Efex can find that information. In this case, it can't. So I'm going to show you how to find this information. We're going to click the Open button, and I need to navigate on my hard drive to this image. Now, the original RAW file, mind you. So the original RAW file has this naming convention to it, and so I've moved Perspective Efex out of the way so I can see this. I'm just going to go ahead and search 31042 on my computer, and hopefully it comes up relatively quickly. It's not looking like it does. I know how to find this image because I put it on my desktop. So bear with me for just a moment as I go in and I find this. I'm going to go to my desktop, and it is in here, and it's in my Bly Street, and it is the image that ends in 42. All right, so there we go, 31042. I click the Open button, and Perspective Efex now knows what lens and camera combination I'm using. Usually you won't need to do that if you're launching your files as raw files, but because I've already done this work and then I deleted it and we're starting over, I needed to do that. So long story short, we fixed our distortion. The next thing we're going to do, I'm going to go into my volume deformation. I'm going to fix that. There's quite a lot happening here, and I actually went out with this webinar in mind, knowing that I needed to fix this stuff. So let's turn on our volume deformation feature, and we're actually going to use, now I've forgotten, we're going to use the horizontal vertical, but we're actually going to turn up the vertical option back to 100%, right? And so what we're getting here, if we look at the before and after now, is the fixing of the optical distortion due to the lens camera combination, and then I'm also sort of stretching out those corners a little bit to fix up the shape of the leaves in the foreground. Now, if we take it further, we can actually, we can take it further. But if I adjust these sliders really, really far, yeah, I'm going to be shifting the shape of these things, but yeah, I'm shifting the shape of these things, which means I might not have the exact composition I want. So my personal approach with this sort of thing is I want to fix the issues that I see, and then kind of like when adjusting for noise reduction, I kind of do the least amount of volume deformation or perspective adjustment that I can get away with so that the image aesthetically looks the way that I need it or want it to look, right? So in this case, I've turned up the horizontal slider to 114. I'm going to click the auto perspective. Watch this. I don't think we're going to leave it on this, but this is a case where the auto perspective option does not do what we need it to do, right? So this is, again, a nice image to kind of to talk about, because this is a situation that the perspective auto button doesn't work perfectly. Now, there's also no good lines for me to gauge my vertical or horizontal adjustments. So what I'm going to do is just kind of manually adjust the image so that I went the wrong way, so that I can kind of get what I want. And I go nice and easy with these sliders. Obviously, you can take them way too far, and that can be useful in some situations. But this is where we're kind of using this for creative purposes, as compared to maybe a complete corrective situation. The long and short of it, let's take a look at the before and after. There's the before, there's the after. I still have some nice foreground. I think I'm actually going to dial back my horizontal adjustment just a touch. There we go. And then we're going to click the save button, because it's 4:52, and I'm realizing that I'm about to run out of time if we don't stop here. So Lori, I'm going to call that a webinar, and we'll leave the last couple minutes here for some questions. Did any questions come in?
Yeah, I've got two questions for you. One, Val was asking, can this app also be used for perspective distortion with portraits? You did show one at the very beginning, but we were hoping that you can just kind of review that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I purposefully chose an image that had a really wide angle situation. I don't have many images that are shot, at such with a wide angle that needed a perspective shift. Now that I think of it, though, a headshot, shot with like a 35mm would be a great candidate for this sort of thing, to just fix the maybe barrel distortion that could be occurring. Yes, I don't have a good example ready to go. So that's probably not the best answer. But it works really well for portraits. I just sort of purposely chose one that was really kind of off. Most of the time, folks probably don't have, they're not putting somebody's head in the lower right corner of a portrait with a super wide angle lens, I don't know. I'm not sure why I even chose that, because it needed correction.
Okay, Al was asking, can I put away my tilt and shift lenses?
That's a tough question. So that was Hal who asked that. So here's the thing: there are some other cool features with the tilt shift lens that you can utilize that this Perspective Efex can't do for you. And the short answer is, yeah, this tool will basically correct for a lot of those distortion problems that can occur in pointing a camera at something, whether it's up or down or directly straight on. A perspective control lens, a tilt shift lens, also allows you to shift, most of them anyways, allows you to shift the lens over or up or down and rotate around. So you can use it for basically creating a panoramic image of a scene by shifting the lens all the way over one way or another, shooting, and then rotating that, because most of those perspective lenses actually allow you to rotate the thing as well. And then you can create a much wider angle view image by creating a panoramic photo from those photos, from the images that you shot. In which case, if the initial image doesn't have the entire building in it or the entire scene in it, by the time you shoot, let's say 12 photos all the way around the entire image circle of that lens, you don't have to point the lens up or down. You can point it straight on, and then it will fix these things. Now, for normal use, yeah, most of the time you can get away with just clicking your auto distortion and, let's say, your auto perspective. This is another situation, though, where I kind of wish I had a tilt shift lens at the time, because if I click on my auto perspective here, because I was shooting with this 14 to 24 mil, and I had to, point the camera up a little bit, now I'm losing some of the edge of my building that I actually wanted in there. So this creates a little bit of a limitation. So that PCE lens probably would have been a great benefit because I could have shifted the thing over. This was actually part of, this was a pre-shot for a Shine the Light image, which is a project that RIT does every year. It's like the RIT Big Shot, which is a really cool project. Anyways, long story short, I would go in with this image and just fix my perspective with my force perspective, my force vertical, and then also a little bit of a adjustment after the fact. Yeah, so there's still a use for perspective lenses, but not like there would have used to have been, let's say, with film photography. And it's not as, you don't need to use them as commonly anymore because of these kinds of distortion control corrections. That's my answer. It's just a little bit long-winded, sorry.
Hey, Dan, do you have time to show the miniature effect?
Oh yeah, shoot, I didn't show the miniature effect.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. You know what, I got into the crop tool, but then I meant to show you the miniature effect on that garden photograph. Darn it, okay, so let's turn off perspective here. Thank you, Lori, for reminding me. The miniature effect is a creative control that you've got down here at the very bottom. I'm going to close all of these other options. So here is our miniature effect, and I'm going to turn it on. And there's some really interesting features in this miniature effect option. So first of all, you have an on image control, and you click on your center button to shift the position of the center point of your miniature effect, which this is actually creating one of the potential creative controls that you can get from a PCE lens, from one of those tilt shift lenses. Technically, it's not exactly the same as what a tilt shift lens can do, because this treats depth of field in a different way than an optical lens would, but it has some really cool capabilities to it. So your center button allows you to move it up and down. And then currently, if I click on the top or the bottom bigger button here, I can rotate, right? And when I rotate it, this is going to shift the blurring effect that's occurring here, which, by the way, because I didn't mention this, anything in the middle section of the miniature effect feature here is going to be tack sharp / not affected by the blurring effect that this tool is creating. Then once we get to the hard line here, there's a transition of blurring that occurs from the hard line to the dotted line. You can click on that dotted line and you can drag your transition out. So it's a really soft transition the further away you get from the hard line, or if you drag it as close as you can get it to that hard line, or the actual line here, it'll have a much harder transition between where there is blur and where there isn't blur. Now, I'm going to drag that as close as I can get it to the hard line, and then note there's a smaller button, right? So you've got your center point button, which allows you to kind of place the vertical of your tilt shift. I'm sorry, your miniature effect. You've got the next line out, which allows you to set sort of exactly what's going to stay sharp or is unaffected by miniature effect. And then these little buttons here allow you to increase or decrease the amount of the blur. So you can blur the heck out of it, or you can just do a very subtle miniature effect, which can be a great way to attract the viewer's attention towards the area of the image you want them to look at. You know, in this case, almost the entire image is practically in focus. I mean, it's relatively sharp from the front of the locomotive to the back of the building there. And so here, maybe adding just a little bit of blur could be useful. Now, you would do that, again, by just scrolling over that smaller button and clicking on our blur amount, and you can bring that up or down. Now, here's a few more interesting features. If you follow my cursor to the right side into the miniature effect, you've got your blur shape, and you can have your blur shape be circular, or you can actually have a bladed effect and this is going to emulate what would happen if we had a miniature effect lens with 6 blades, right? Or with 9 blades. Now, there isn't going to be a dramatic shape difference with this particular image because I don't have any really good specular highlights. But watch this specular highlight right here, this where we've got that sodium vapor light. And if I go from 9 blades to 6 blades, you'll actually see the shape of this shift a little bit. It's much more noticeable on smaller, and maybe if we just blur it less, there'd be a little bit more of a shape difference. Let's see what happens. No, it doesn't give us that much difference. Okay, anyways, the blur shape is the sort of the aesthetic of how the lens rendered, or how the feature is emulating a lens to create this blurring effect. Now, the other 2 options here are the symmetric position and the symmetric blur. I'm going to zoom out. The symmetric position allows you to individually control the top and the bottom blurring, right? So when this checkbox is on, if I click on my those hard lines there, the blur lines, it's going to affect both of them, right? If I turn this off, now when I grab hold of one of them, I can adjust it separately, right? So that's the symmetric, right? So symmetrical position. And then this is the symmetric blur, right? Where I'm able to control this bottom blurring effect at a different rate than the top blurring effect. So this can be really great because we can blur the heck out of the foreground and then, you know, maybe shift this, maybe have a large transition, and then have just a very small amount of blur occurring. So this is where, you know, this goes far, far beyond what you could do with a, you know, with a physical lens system. So you can actually control quite a lot of this blurring effect, which gives you more capability than a sort of tilt shift optical system. Or, you know what, might be cool to combine the 2 together. See what happens if you shoot, if you've got a PCE lens, shoot with the sort of miniature effect, and then you can go and tweak it even further like this. Cool. Sorry, Lori, another long-winded answer, but there's a lot to that one.
No, that's great. That's a lot of fun too. Great. Well, Dan, thank you very much for showing the ins and outs of Perspective Efex from one click to getting more advanced and using a lot of those tools. So that was really informative. So thank you very much for that. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Dan, I'll go ahead and let you close out. And again, appreciate everybody's participation in this. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for attending the webinar here today. Hopefully you found it to be beneficial. We do have, you know, more webinars coming up, one this Thursday, and hopefully you can stop by for that. That'll be great. It's in regards to preparing black and white images for print purposes. And it's in partnership with DSI, Digital Silver Imaging, which is a fantastic company out of the on the East Coast, out of the Boston, Massachusetts area. And they've got some really interesting and beautiful printing capabilities that we're going to be talking about on Thursday, again, in regards to black and white photography. So hopefully you can join us then. If not, thanks again for joining, ladies and gentlemen. Have a wonderful week. Enjoy your software, try out the software, use the link that you'll actually, I think Lori probably copy and pasted that into the questions box, and you will get a follow-up email that has the direct link over to pick up the software if you don't have it already. Anyways, thanks a lot, ladies and gentlemen, and enjoy your software and enjoy photography.